Guys, how's it going? It's Al. Welcome back to the show because we have a very special show. We did this last year. Two friends of mine, JJ Zachariason, the late round quarterback, and Rich Rhibar, Lord Reeves from Sharp Football Analysis are joining me to try and educate me and hopefully you, because you guys are probably smarter than me about all this stuff. You guys know everything there is to know about all the running back and wide receiver prospects, and they're just going to give you a little bit of confirmation on the players that you already know about. But me, I got to learn everything. So I'm going to bounce all the questions that I have for them about this year's prospect class at running back and specifically at wide receiver. Last year, we had some big hits. We also had a couple of misses. We'll talk about those and see what process changes we can make to be better moving forward in our decisions for your dynasty drafts, your rookie drafts, or your best ball drafts as the summer goes along. So thank you all for being here. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the notifications bell, and leave me a reply down below letting me know who you think the top fantasy prospect's going to be from this draft, or which prospect you would like to end up in a very specific situation at the draft. So without any further ado, let's bring in the guys. Let's go.
He's a legend.
Hey guys, how's it going? JJ, how you been?
What's up, man? Good to talk to you.
You too. Reeves?
What's the good word, guys? You know, it's Monday, March 21st. The weather's starting to turn here. Al, you never have bad weather, but
no.
High school baseball starting here. I've got to go to a game tonight. You just hope when they play this time of year, like you can just tolerate and sit outside. JJ used to live in the Northeast as well. So I mean, I just want to be able to sit outside and watch them play.
I'm doing all the coaching over here. My two kids playing kind of pony baseball, 10 under and 12 under. So like I'm at the park assistant coaching and managing every single week. And I know exactly what that feels like, but the weather's a little bit nicer where I live. So it's warm like all the time. Before we start, definitely, if you don't already, go give Reeves a follow, Lord Reeves, at Lord Reeves on Twitter. His analysis is available at Sharp Football Analysis. And JJ, we have JJ's face and then we have JJ's face. So like LateRound.com. He is the LateRoundQB on Twitter. Go give him a follow on Twitter and definitely go check out his site that he has just launched himself. We are going to talk about all the prospects. So I wanted to start with some of the analysis from last year. One thing that you guys were very, very, very adamant about last year was how ridiculously amazing a prospect Ja'Marr Chase was. Like an all-time great wide receiver prospect, landed in a perfect spot for him and produce, because when talent meets opportunity, that's when we get a really big hit. So this is not the same type of wide receiver class or prospect class this year like it was last year with a prospect like JJ up top, like Ja'Marr up top. JJ's a great prospect too.
I can play some wide receiver.
Yeah, he can get in the slot for sure. He's very gritty. So we're gonna find out who these guys are, but talk to me about Ja'Marr Chase, the big hit from last year, and let's talk about a miss or two as well before we get into this year's prospects.
You take it, Rich.
I mean, what do we really need to say about Ja'Marr Chase?
He is who we thought he was.
Yeah, exactly. And remember in the preseason, we had the little scare of the drops, him getting acclimated, and that kind of even pushed him down a little bit. But yeah, I mean, we knew he was an elite blue chip prospect. I mean, this class in totality doesn't have a guy like Ja'Marr Chase. It doesn't have a Kyle Pitts. But it is an overall deep class. I think like the wide receiver 12 in this class is better than the wide receiver 12 last year. You just have those elite prospects. I think this is a really tough year if you have like a dynasty 101 to like 104. You're going to really rack your brain. Like it's going to be really one of those things that like you're going to be like kind of really going into the 11th hour, like which one of these guys do I really want? Because there's not a lot separating, a Garrett Wilson, a Drake London, a Treylon Burks if he gets the kind of capital, and you're going to be like really pissed off if you picked the wrong guy 2 years from now, right? Like I had that opportunity and I took in N'Keal Harry. So I mean, I think it's a really good year to have like late firsts and early seconds, because I think the depth of this class is here. But overall, I mean, it's really tight at the top and really can kind of go in any direction.
JJ, do you want to add anything on Ja'Marr Chase? By the way, in the background, this is the prospect guide that JJ puts out from LateRound.com. So if you wanted to go check that out and have it emailed directly to you, it's got the second year guys as well as all of the prospects at running back and wide receiver, everything else for this year's draft and your dynasty draft. So definitely go check that out.
Yeah, so like I have the year 2 model that I created this offseason that basically looks at a guy's prospect score in addition to sort of some inputs from his production in year 1. And it combines that and it gives you a score for how well these guys are going to do in years 2 and 3. And so Jamar Chase, he was from a prospect score standpoint in my model, he was a 99.6th percentile wide receiver in the models. He was like top 5, since 2011 or something like that, or maybe even like top 3. And then the year 2 model, the only guy I think who's better in the year 2 model is OBJ. And it's because OBJ's rookie season on a points per game basis was just so out of control. And he was a really good prospect too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like OBJ, I know there was a lot when OBJ came out, it was like peak, like height, weight sort of Twitter, on the analytics side of things. And I was like sort of getting into prospecting. I wasn't as like deep as Rich was then. But like, there was some pushback with OBJ, but in hindsight, and I've built my model to test things and to look back on history, and that's how it projects things. OBJ was a really, really good prospect. I mean, he was like a very strong especially when you consider who he was playing with and all that kind of stuff. So Jamar Chase, in the year 2 model, looks unbelievable. His expected max PPR point per game season in years 2 and 3. So it just looks at it's basically like a regression analysis that looks at how many points we'd expect a guy to have in his best season in years 2 or 3 is 21.5. So we're basically looking at Jamar Chase scoring 21.5 PPR points per game in either year 2 or year 3, which is basically like the wide receiver 1 season, from a fantasy perspective. So he's in a really, really good spot. Really hard to even find like a comparable for him because he's just so unique, but he's an unbelievable player.
And in the perfect spot too. So like this is where prospect and opportunity meet, especially with the Bengals improving their offensive line as much as they have already through free agency with 3 signings, capping it off with Lyle Collins, who was released by the Cowboys. So in terms of this year's guys, you mentioned something that I thought was very interesting. Height and weight Twitter in regards to wide receiver prospects was something that was very prevalent, 6, 7, 8 years ago, where if a guy weighed over 215 or was over 6'1" or 6'2", statistics had shown that there was more probability for them to result in higher end fantasy seasons because they were the guys who were being targeted more in the end zones. The highest leverage targets are the end zone targets. But with the move that the NFL has seen over the last 3 or so years, moving to more 3 wide and 4 wide situations than ever before, collectively across the league, more spread offense sort of techniques, does size really matter at wide receiver as much as it used to?
Well, it kind of changed. It's not just like the humanity has changed. Like guys are leaner. And, we've seen this really kind of take off in the quarterback position. Like basically every quarterback's a good athlete now almost that comes out. But, it's there wasn't just an influx of those guys at the collegiate level. Like we had a DK Metcalf, we had an AJ Brown, but just go recently over like maybe the past, several drafts and look at like the average, height and weight of these wide receivers that are coming to the NFL. It's what the NFL's had to work with. These guys are all like, on the top end, like they're like 195 to like 205 in that area. And then you figure you gain weight throughout your career, like the guys that are built like CD Lamb, right? Instead of these, these big, thick daddies that were coming into the NFL, the Julios. We had that nice run, man, where it was just like all the guys that were coming, like Demaryius Thomas. And we've got a couple bigger guys in this class, but it's interesting the way they're used. And we'll get into kind of that a little bit. Guys like Drake London has to have some size, and we've got George Pickens and Treylon Burks, especially. He's in that mold, like he's like just under 230. But those guys weren't coming into the NFL, and they still kind of aren't. If you look at like the kind of the majority of this class, they're all like in that area, that 195, 205. Guys are leaner. They're playing multiple positions now. It's not just that jump ball game, play above the rim. It's, how can we use like players' versatility now? And we've seen coaches really tap into that. And it's kind of like really impacted what we've seen, how the NFL has changed on the field as well.
JJ?
Yeah, I would agree. Matter? I mean, yeah, I can say too that in my prospect model for wide receivers, it doesn't even care about size. Like I have it as inputs. Oh, sorry, I should say it does care about it, just not nearly as much as it does at running back. Like
you just can't be 5'8".
Yeah, right. Like there are definitely thresholds where I look at it. I look at BMI mostly in the prospect model. That's what the input is for the model. Like if you get under a certain threshold BMI, it's at least a red flag. The way that I sort of approach this in general is that I assume that a prospect is perfect entering this filtration system, right? So a prospect is entering the model, he's perfect, right? And then you just look at all these different inputs and you see where there are red flags, as opposed to like, oh, I'm avoiding this guy because of X, Y, and Z. I'm just saying, oh, this guy has a red flag because of X, Y, and Z. And so, a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, for instance, who at Kentucky was listed at like 5'11", and he comes out and he at the combine and he measures in at 5'8" flat. And then you look at historically at wide receivers who have been 5'8" or under, and you can maybe throw Tyreek Hill in there, like maybe, but that was a pro day measurement, so it's a little bit iffier. And Tyreek is also listed at like 5'11" in the NFL because the NFL measurements are just wacky and different. But since at least like the last 10, 15 years, the best hit among guys who have gone to the combine and been drafted is basically Jamison Crowder. Like that's what you're looking at for a 5'8" wide receiver or shorter. And, you have Wan'Dale Robinson in this class who has a great production profile, but that's still a question mark with his height. You have Calvin Austin also, who's a smaller guy, but very, very speedy, athletic, in that mold. And look, if you're a smaller player, you obviously want something else physically where you can sort of make up for that. And like a guy like Austin, like, he's at least like, he ran like a 4.3. I mean, like he's at least very, very fast. So, I sort of just like, it's sort of like a give and take, and you're just sort of looking at these guys through that filtration system. And you're not like fading totally, especially because we're all concerned about cost too, right? Like we're concerned about where these guys get drafted. If we knock down Wan'Dale Robinson to like wide receiver 10 or 12 or something like that, but he's going at wide receiver 17, then okay, we can still get behind Wan'Dale Robinson as a guy to draft, despite the fact that he is 5'8", and that's somewhat of a concern. So, there are other inputs that matter more too, like production. You should lead with 100%, especially at the wide receiver position. It matters the most. Certain production. Don't just look at like raw production, but production matters most at the position. And then from there, you just look at the rest of these like tertiary metrics and secondary metrics and measurables, and you say, okay, this guy's good, this guy's not, et cetera, et cetera. And you just sort of whittle down these guys to get a better idea of them, and then you throw them in your rankings that way.
Sounds good. So obviously, like draft capital matters and works on where you're going to be rating these players as prospects. Something we're not going to know. We just have projectable where we think they're going to go at this point until it's actually solidified on draft day. But like, what about other on-field stats? Like the one that comes up most is that I see is like separation versus contested catch, right? So like guys who are good at contested catch rate usually means that they're not getting away from somebody, especially in college. So does separation in college matter as much, or is it somebody who can't separate in college definitely isn't going to separate in the pros? Because there's some guys that can get away with it, right? Because like Jamar Chase isn't a big separator, but he gets away with it.
Rich has done a little bit because Rich has looked at it a little bit more than me with the stats that he has and whatnot with this class. So do you want to take this one, Rich?
Well, it's tough because there's a lot of gray area, in collegiate separation, especially with the talent, being so dispersed as it is in college football. But yeah, I mean, typically when you look at like guys that have like flamed, I mean, I start to get the EBGBs of guys that like rely on contested catches. We talked about Terrace Marshall before the show. And that archetype of receiver, I mean, like some of my biggest misses are like those types of guys, N'Keal Harry was a guy that relied on a lot of screens, had a high contested catch rate. Josh Doxson, Denzel Mims,
James Washington,
Treadwell, all these guys, but those are even guys that had high capital. Like James Washington was a third rounder, but like, all these guys that come in and get this capital, like he's like Treadwell or Doxson. It's like, there's other things that go into the input of why those guys are missing. Like Doxson was a 5th-year senior, like all this, there's other things that go into it. But I will say like that type of player has had like, I think the more trouble, and it ties into what we talked about previously, is just NFL coaches are looking for a lot more versatility now than ever. Like, can you play multiple positions? What can we get you, how can we get you in mismatches? And then when you look at like the top of this class, I mean, we've got, a guy like Drake London, who is a bigger guy, but like he has this really unique profile for like how he was used. I mean, he was basically just like hammered with screen passes. Only Treylon Burks had more screen targets than him. And then he was also, third in this class in contested catch rates. Like you've already got now his largest sample of targets are screens and contested catches, right? So it's just like, it's really kind of like hard to gather what's going on. And then you pair this with like some work like Dwayne McFarland's done at Pro Football Focus, where he looked at like the highest routes that are used in the NFL, the most targeted routes that are used in the NFL. And Drake London, doesn't even score in the top 10 in this class in not one single of those routes. So then it's just like we're pairing all these pieces together, and it's just like, yeah, all right, like this could be like a big red flag area. And then you also look at the flip side though, like where like me and JJ are here, we're looking for things that have a clear signal, right? And Drake London has all these things that are clear signals. I mean, he's the second youngest wide receiver in this class. He had a huge breakout. He does all these things that are like big signals on our end. So it's like kind of hard to find that balance. Even separation stats in the NFL are a little bit tricky because it's so dependent on like where you play. But I will say though, I personally, from like a stance of like me playing Dynasty, that archetype of receiver has been one I've been a little more cautious on, especially with like Supreme Capital. Like when you have like a guy like T Higgins and he's going at like the 1-2 turn and like a loaded draft class, swing away, like all way. But like I said, when we have like the 102 and you're like, all right, Breece Hall went 101. Now I have to take one of the receivers. Do I go with Treylon Burks? Because like, if he hits, like the outcome of he hits is probably phenomenal. Do I take Garrett Wilson because he's safer? It might not be like as big as upside, or do you go with like London? It's like you're gonna really kind of rack your brain, and like it's gonna be tough. You maybe have your flavor of choice, but like those guys are all gonna be pretty tight. And when we look back on this, like we're definitely gonna be wrong on at least one of these guys, if not multiple of them.
From what I could gather, there's 5 guys that across all the mock drafts, however much stock you want to put into NFL mock drafting, there seems to be 5 wide receivers that are typically going in the first round. Guys like Drake London, in no particular order, mind you, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Olave, Burks, and Jamison Williams with the knee injury. So if he's back or if he's not, or if they're just going to play that as, we're going to pick him and then he's just too good of a talent. All different too, very unique, very diverse. Obviously you've got London and Burks as really big guys, like big beefy dudes, and then the other guys a little bit more speedster, downfield target type oriented guys. How much is it dependent on where they land for where you're going to be picking them in rookie drafts?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter to me a significant amount from the stand, especially a wide receiver, mostly because situations can change so much. It's similar to like how I view Devontae Smith in Dynasty right now, where folks are like, what should I've got, he's probably one of the players that I've gotten questions about the most this year, is what to do with Devontae Smith. Like, should you be buying him or selling him? And to me, there's been so many rumors and such with Jalen Hurts over the last year and a half that, you have 2 outcomes here. You have either Philadelphia sticks with Jalen Hurts, and if they stick with Jalen Hurts, that means that Jalen Hurts probably got better as a passer, which is good news for Devontae Smith. And if they get rid of Jalen Hurts, that means that Jalen Hurts didn't get better as a passer, and they're going to bring someone in who hypothetically could be better as a passer or get better as a passer. And so to me, it's like, okay, well, Devontae Smith, the player, is really good, like in my models and such. And we saw him last year. Like he had like a well above average rookie season, but it was just like, took a back seat with what Jalen Waddle and Jamar Chase did, but he still was fine last year. And the reason I bring that up as an example is because situations can change so much and so drastically, right? There are some situations where, if there's a team that has a quarterback like Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, where we know factually that Lamar Jackson is going to be the quarterback in Baltimore, more than likely, like a 99% chance, 95% chance that Lamar Jackson is going to be the quarterback long-term there. And we know factually that there's a very, very low chance that Baltimore is going to even get close to like a middle of the road team in pass rate. Like I think that what we saw with Baltimore this past year could be one of the higher pass rates that they end up seeing over the next 5 or so years, as long as Lamar Jackson is the quarterback there. Because everything's sort of like, the defense had its rough patches and injuries, and teams were able to score points on them. But then on top of that, they didn't have any running backs, and like they that would have been a year that they went nuts through the air was last year, and they still didn't really go nuts through the air. They're still bottom 10 in the league in pass rate. Like, this is just the way that this offense is going to operate with Lamar Jackson more than likely. So when Rashad Bateman lands in Baltimore, then it's easy to say, I'm not moving him down a tier per se, but, Rashad Bateman objectively entering last year's draft looked really, really good on paper and in my model. And so I can say, though, okay, this landing spot isn't that great. I'm not going to move him out of his tier, but there was a large group of players in that tier where I felt more comfortable going with an Elijah Moore over Rashad Bateman in my rookie drafts, just because of, Rich and I are in enough leagues where we can get some diversity and get, a share of most of these guys anyway. But, if you're only playing in one league, you can definitely utilize landing spot to some degree, but I think it's really easy to overrate landing spot to the point where, you end up, you end up just devaluing these players or overvaluing them. A really good example of this is, one of the worst rookie draft picks over the last 10 years from an ADP standpoint was Samaje Perine. He was a late first round pick in rookie drafts, despite being a fourth rounder for Washington, but he got driven up so much because they had an empty backfield there where Perine would have just walked in and been the supposed starter. And he got some work early on, but he was not good enough to be, a strong running back in that backfield and a strong fantasy asset. I mean, he was a fourth rounder for a reason, right? And so, you can actually find some really, really good values in rookie drafts when you look at draft capital itself, and look at like the second round. Some of the best values at the running back position have been, day 2 picks who go in the second round of rookie drafts who don't have immediate opportunity, like a Damian Harris, for instance, right? Like Damian Harris, was he like a slam dunk pick in the second round? No, but we knew that he wasn't going to see that much work his rookie year. And then things just changed dramatically because that's just what happens in the NFL. So yes, you can utilize landing spot. Like I guarantee you, like, let's just run an example. Like right now I have the big 3 wide receivers in the top tier, right? Where it's Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks, and Drake London. And by tier, I look at these players as relatively interchangeable in rank. Like I have a preference, albeit a slight preference. I like Garrett Wilson the most because I think, to Rich's point, he's like the safest bet right now. But if one of those 3 players goes to Green Bay, then yeah, it's going to be easier to say, okay, let's say like Treylon Burks goes to Green Bay, then he's going to be my wide receiver 1 more than likely. And it's okay to shift guys within that same tier because that, he's going to probably get immediate opportunity. He's associated with one of the best quarterbacks in the game. And you want your players to appreciate and value immediately, right? Like you want a player that you're drafting in Dynasty, especially to get value and to sustain that value, after his rookie year, because you don't want to have those question marks about players. And so it's still important to some degree, but I wouldn't overstate it because you also get situations like Elijah Moore this past year where he had a baller profile. He looked really good on paper. And then he balls out whenever they actually utilized him. And that was despite a really, really bad situation, right? Like no one would have expected Elijah Moore after the bye to average like 18 PPR points per game or whatever he did. So, and even like Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? Like he went nuts in a bad situation. So don't overstate situations. I would just shift players within the same tier as opposed to like drastically changing my rankings.
Am I wrong for thinking that Treylon Burks just ends up on the Cowboys?
I mean, it's easy to draw the
Arkansas
Arkansas
and like they need a wide receiver. It's like he's gonna be a Cowboy.
It'd be awesome. I'm here for that.
Yeah, listen, inject it. I'm all for it.
Yeah, sweet.
I mean, think about it. I mean, because you put a couple guys in the field that could do a lot with the ball in their hands. CeeDee Lamb already was, 5th among all wide receivers in yards after contact per catch. You have Tony Pollard, who I believe is going to play some more receiver this year a little bit too. You get a guy like Treylon Burks who's really good with the ball in his hands. You got a lot of chances here with Kellen Moore. And you've got the new Austin Hooper, Dalton Schultz, just catching and following.
new Austin Hooper.
That is good.
I mean, Rich is the king. He's a solid player when you're getting you're getting peppered with 8-yard targets.
Rich is the king of arbitrage, man, and that is the most rich comment. That's perfect. It's perfect. It's like whenever you would call Zach Ertz Jason Witten for
new Jason Witten.
The new Jason Witten.
That's not a knock on him. It's just what it is.
I mean, he's fine. He'll be fine.
See, there's the fine.
There it is. There it is.
One of my biggest things, one of my biggest pet peeves from last year is a lot of people talk about how the last 5 weeks Kyler Murray played hurt, even though he had an injured ankle and was running for 60 yards a game. But he was injured because he was throwing to a slot receiver that has historically struggled versus man coverage and a tight end that can only catch the ball and fall down.
Right.
I mean,
weapons matter.
He did have, major alpha Christian Kirk, though, that he could throw the ball.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Paid like an alpha.
Crazy.
Yeah, it is. Look, free agency is wild, man.
I'm with JJ though. Like the stuff is just so fluid. Like the NFL is so fluid. We saw it a couple years ago with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? He gets the capital, he goes to the Chiefs, even though everybody and their grandma had Jonathan Taylor coming in the draft as the best running back. And what happens? Clyde Edwards-Helaire ends up going 1-1 a lot of drafts. And, it's easy to kind of get caught into that. The NFL is just so fluid. I try to do a better job of sticking to it, but like JJ's Bateman's a great example of just how you can maneuver within a tier and factor in landing spot, but, not having it really kind of, go wild and alter your course on a prospect like it did with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And he, for a lot of people, like Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the 4th or 5th best running back in that class, you know, subjectively and objectively, no matter where you analyze stuff. But because he went to the Chiefs juggernaut, that entity, and, you know, the Andy Reid stigma, and you got this pass catching back, people took him from, you know, RB4, RB5 to all the way to RB1. And, you know, and here we are now in year 3 of that in hindsight. And, you know, a lot of those people probably wish they had Jonathan Taylor on their team.
Yeah, probably.
Right. But like, there's really the crux of the argument. And this is a great segue to start talking about some of the running backs as well. But like, ending up on that Chiefs offense, there's something magical about it because they're really, really good. And everybody expects anybody that goes to the Chiefs, well, now he's got to jump 2 rounds minimum in a, let's say, a best ball draft, right? Because who's drafting their season-long team now? You're drafting best ball or Dynasty if you're drafting now. So like a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you can make that argument of like, I get it why the people jumped on him, because if he was to get 300 plus touches in that type of an offense, it matters. But like what you're getting at is he wasn't good enough to sustain that or to hold that job. But what about a guy like Breece Hall, who right now looks like, from everything that I've read, and please tell me if I'm wrong, to be the guy in this draft class? Now, can make the running backs don't matter argument, but like about here, there, or anywhere. But like, if he ends up in a great spot, is he like, if you're drafting your Dynasty League before the draft, is he the 1.01 for rookies? And also, if he lands in a spot where he does project to get like 250, 300 touches as a rookie year, does he fall out of that at all? Or is that just what he is this year because of projectable fantasy points and talent and everything else?
I think you're going to run into a potential problem, if we see Kenneth Walker get a better landing spot objectively than Breece Hall. Like, I don't know I can't think off the top of my head of like what the 2 spots would be, but like draft capital wise, they're actually projected to go fairly close to one another. It's just that a guy like Walker, you know, the way the stuff that Rich and I look at, you know, there's definitely a red flag and concern with Walker's receiving profile, which, you know, look, I've had plenty of arguments about this, and people think that I don't like Kenneth Walker because I pointed out the fact that guys who have sub 6% max season reception shares generally don't pan out. I mean, like if you look at day 2 guys, which is when Kenneth Walker is projected to go, over the last decade, who have had that kind of reception share, you get, I think it's in my prospect guide, I can pull that up really quick, but you get some really, really questionable players. I mean, top 100 players in the NFL draft, top 100 running backs in the NFL draft over the last decade that had sub 6% target or reception shares: Ronald Jones, Deontay Foreman, Derrick Henry, Kenyon Drake, Kristen Michael. Those are the 5 that end up popping whenever you use that filter. And it's not to say that Kenneth Walker can't buck that trend, but Walker also played for 2 teams in college, and on both teams, he didn't see many looks through the air. And again, a lot of people say, oh, Wake Forest didn't utilize their running backs of the backfield. Michigan State didn't utilize their running backs of the backfield. I get it. Like that could very easily be what goes on with Kenneth Walker and what is going on with Kenneth Walker, but it's still a concern. It's still a red flag. It's still something that we're looking at and saying, oh, there's a mark on his profile as to why he's not Breece Hall, because Breece Hall has a way better production profile across the board. You know, I don't know if he's necessarily more athletic, but he's a better size and just probably a little bit more athletic than Walker is. But regardless, you know, I think that you could run into a situation where, you know, teams might like Walker more than Hall. Like, I think it's very possible. I mean, scouts like Walker more than Hall. I think PFF, I might be mistaken, but I think PFF has Walker over Hall with their grading system entering the draft. So like, there's definitely gonna be a lot of people who like Kenneth Walker over Breece Hall. But I think this is like a greater discussion of like, what are we trying to solve as fantasy analysts and fantasy players versus what the NFL is trying to solve, right? And draft capital definitely has a lot of signal, don't get me wrong, but an NFL team might not look at pass catching as this like huge important thing for a running back the way that we would, because we know that PPR leagues and even half PPR leagues, even standard leagues, we know that receptions are incredibly important at the position. And that's at least some sort of concern and flag for a guy like Walker. So, you know, wherever Breece Hall lands, I think he's going to walk into a lot of touches. It would be probably, you know, pretty shocking if he didn't see at least a decent amount of work. You know, obviously you have situations like last year with Javonte where they split a backfield more 50-50. But even still, you know, It's not like Javonte was like completely unusable from a fantasy perspective. So, I do think that, Hall will likely maintain ADP generally, both in redraft and in dynasty, and whatever you're doing, regardless of his landing spot. But I do want to at least throw in the idea that Walker could see very similar draft capital in this draft.
All right.
Yeah, I think we've seen the NFL has slowly started to value, missed tackle like per touch numbers in the NFL draft, and Kenneth Walker like blows like out of the water and like those in those categories. And we've seen some staffs really start to elevate that. Like we know, like the Buffalo Bills specifically looked at that one metric, like all their guys. And sometimes it can lead you down a false road, but we saw like Javonte Williams was like a smash in that area. You started to see throughout the Senior Bowl in the process, Damian Pierce is another guy that like really pops in that. And, gets a lot of steam, could go a lot higher than his profile suggests. And that's where Walker gets, but Walker's really interesting from like a receiving stance because like all his peripheral stuff shows that like they shouldn't really be throwing him the ball. Like Jonathan Taylor didn't catch a ton of passes, but when he caught passes in college, like his yards per out run and his yards per target and yards per reception, like all really popped. Like Kenneth Walker wasn't getting targeted, on a per route basis. He had the third lowest in this draft class. He also just averaged 6.8 yards per catch when he caught the ball and forced missed tackles at a lower rate than when he actually was running the football. So it could be like a signal that it is a true limitation. I mean, there's a difference between being able to catch the football though and adding passing value to your
right.
Leonard Fournette's a great example of this, right? Leonard Fournette is a real solid pass catcher when they throw to him, but like he doesn't really like add a lot of like passing game dynamicism to like an offense, right? Like, but he's functional. He can catch those passes. Whereas, Austin Eckler is lining up at receiver and like they're getting him like they're diagnosing plays for him in that. So like he finds an offense that's going to give him like dump downs and he can be fine with those. Like Jonathan Taylor catches everything, since he's been at the Colts. It hasn't been a problem. But when we're looking at things like Al, you do every Sunday we get on, during the week, we're checking boxes, right? We're looking for those 5 box checkers. And when you look at from a prospect stance, from a modeling stance and objectively trying to find these signals, there's not one thing Breece Hall doesn't have. He's got the age. He's got 8. He broke out at age 18, with 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns, had 23 touchdowns in subsequent seasons. He's only going to be 21-year-old rookie. He caught 20 more passes all 3 years in college. He also is 217 pounds, like right in that, like where we want like running backs that aren't going to get pulled off the field in situations, near the goal line where some coach is going to be like, I can't give my 205-pound guy this 1 yard carry. And then also he's an elite athlete. Like there's not one thing that like he didn't like, there wasn't one box he didn't check. So to me, like, I'm just not going to overthink it. I'm going to take the guy that just checked every box.
See, I think that we overthink it a lot. Like you mentioned Jonathan Taylor, right? And well, he didn't catch passes in college, but like nobody that plays running back at Wisconsin ever catches passes. Like he caught more balls in his career at Wisconsin than James freaking White.
He had a good
James White.
His target share was good.
Yeah, his reception share, like his share. That's why we look at market share stuff, right? Like Jonathan Taylor was over a 10% reception best season reception share because that's one of the like I'm telling you, best season reception share is probably the most important production metric in my model for running backs. Like that's how crazy receiving matters or how much receiving matters at the running back position. I mean, technically yards per team, total yards per team play is a little bit more important, but don't understate reception share. It's incredibly important. And that's why that filter that I read earlier, of the guys with a sub 6% share, you have a bunch of busts, right? Or guys who at least like emerged later on in their career, like a Derrick Henry or a Deontay Foreman, but they're still not catching passes out of the backfield, right? I don't even think that we could say that Deontay Foreman emerged yet. He just had, last year, the second half of last year. So yeah, I mean, like we can't discount that, but this is also why we're looking at market share numbers. Cause like Jonathan Taylor is a great example of like this dissonance between people who don't really know what these like models are doing or like what analytical analysis is saying about these players. It's like this dissonance of people being like, well, Jonathan Taylor didn't catch a lot of passes, but he did within context. Like he actually was totally fine as a receiver in context. Whereas Kenneth Walker both didn't catch a lot of passes and within context didn't do anything as a receiver. That's where the red flag comes into play.
I felt like I was taking crazy pills so much before that draft. Like I was the one arguing like Jonathan Taylor will be fine catching passes. Cause like I was the one guy who was, no, he never caught passes. Like, oh, give me a break. Come on. It's like, It's not that he can't, they just don't do that. We have a nice little segue here, but we're going to have to frame it around some absolutely breaking news in the NFL. to make our next transition. Matt Ryan has been traded from the Falcons to the Indianapolis Colts. Speaking of Jonathan Taylor as well, pretty nice. I mean, look, from one placeholder to another placeholder, right? Like, you're not going to get a lot of years out of Matt Ryan.
Yeah, if it's Philip Rivers style.
Yeah, like, just get the guy. They go from Philip Rivers to Wentz now to Ryan.
Good for Pittman.
It's great for Pittman.
A pocket passer.
Good for that offense, right?
Yeah. You look. I like when my weapons have pocket passers that can at least moderately distribute the ball. Like I'm not saying Matt Ryan is unbelievable, but like Rich said, it's like a Philip Rivers situation where that when they pass the ball or when they drop back to pass, that they will be not scrambling, and that's a good thing.
They will be not running. See, I just like when my weapons have a good offense around them, whether or not the quarterback's going to run or not. Like, you need volume, obviously. Sure. Like, you don't want Baltimore wide receivers, but like, if you give me like a Deshaun Watson offense, or if you give me a mobile quarterback offense, they can throw the ball 600 times too. So I just want a guy that's going to throw.
Sure. There is a correlation. Like you ideally want just like a really, really good pocket passer. Like, in an ideal world, like, you just want an Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball 700 times, and that would be perfect, right? But like, Matt Ryan's fine enough. Like, he can at least distribute it. They have a good offensive line, good enough offensive line. I mean, I just feel like it's probably a little bit lateral. Like, it's not like they like did anything unbelievable to upgrade the position year over year. But
Wentz was pretty bad.
Maybe he's got a little juice left.
Ryan was
really bad.
In context, Ryan played pretty well last year. I know, like, SIS, like, he's good on, like, his on target rate and stuff was good. They just had no weapons and no offensive line, so at least he has that good for him. Like I said, it's more of a kick the cans situation with the Colts. Like, I don't really know, like Ballard really doesn't spend any money since he's been there. Like, and it's fine, you haven't given out bad contracts, but like, they've been just chasing like this quarterback position like every year. He'll be like the sixth different starter in 6 years, right? Like, at week one. I think it was Brissett, Luck, Brissett, Rivers, Wentz, and then Ryan. And he's fine. It's the AFC South, but like, you look at this arms race now that's going on in the AFC, and you're going to bring Matt Ryan to the fight.
Yeah.
Good luck.
They have all Hall of Fame quarterbacks in the AFC this year. That's all that there is. And you're like, we're going to bring in a 74-year-old Matt Ryan.
What was the compensation?
I think it was a third. I saw
second or third.
Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah, it wasn't that. Yeah, just a 2022 third round pick.
Let's also give Atlanta some props for how they handled the whole situation with like them going after. I mean, I'm not gonna say anything about like them going after Deshaun Watson, but the fact that they were going after Deshaun Watson, I thought that they at least handled like the Matt Ryan side. I mean, look at that compared to like the Baker situation in Cleveland and compare and contrast. Obviously, Baker is a lot more emotional and a lot less mature with that kind of thing than a guy like Matt Ryan would be. But I still give Atlanta some props for how they handled the whole situation there.
Are you saying that Baker's not an adult?
It just stinks for Atlanta because last year it was so obvious what they needed to do. And I don't know how, what was really available to them, but they had to trade that fourth pick. They had to trade out. Spot. Yeah. And they didn't. And I also talked about last year too, like after they traded Julio, that they needed to extend Russell Gage. Then I was like, they have to immediately just extend Russell Gage. He's gonna be a free agent. If they believe he can even have any type of servable season, like they're not gonna be able to bring him back, and they weren't. So I mean, I just question a lot of decisions that they've done so far. I don't know what direction they're gonna go in now. And then for us too, I mean, the one kind of hanging element in the air here is like, we know what Matt Ryan is for fantasy, and like, that's fine. He's going to be a QB2. We can stream him, if the matchup's juicy or whatever. But like, now who's throwing the ball at Kyle Pitts right now?
Dude,
I need to know.
It's going to be rough.
Willis.
It's going to be rough. I kind of want them to like go after Mariota and then draft a quarterback and just see what comes of it. But I don't know. I mean, like, that alone is a problem for. Like, I obviously I don't think his dynasty stock changes dramatically, but like, from a redraft standpoint, it's gonna be a lot more difficult to buy in. I mean, Rich and I have both done a lot of studies on like how rookies impact their pass catchers in fantasy. So that's obviously a redraft thing, and how mobile quarterbacks can impact their pass catchers. And I mean, if they end up having to rely on a guy like Malik, then that's gonna be rough. Pitts is gonna have to need like a 30% target share to probably pay off.
I mean, look at the wide receiver room. He might get that.
He might. I mean, it's possible, but I don't want to really bank on that with a tight end.
Yeah, I'm real curious to see too Willis in general if he does end up getting drafted to a team that has clear intentions of making him a week 1 starter,
Right.
just given the amount of work he still needs as well. So there's a lot of elements kind of moving with the trade. I mean, Colts are kind of just kicking the can, and then we're just hoping Atlanta fields like 6 functional football players at this point.
Yeah.
So do the
They might have the
matter
worst
this year?
They
Like,
have to have the worst roster in the league, I think, right now.
They had no
Houston.
cap space last year. It was rough.
Yeah.
Isn't Houston still the worst roster? Like,
I don't know. I
imaginable?
might take Houston over Atlanta right
They
now.
needed to trade all those picks, man. They needed to trade that pick for sure.
Yeah.
It's rough.
So quarterback, usually we stick to running back and wide receiver, but because of that trade and now that there's an opening, before there was probably very little to no path for a week 1 rookie quarterback starter in 2022. I'm looking at ESPN's ranking. I think this is in the Mel Kiper Jr. article. They have it as Kenny Pickett with his small hands. He's like a carny, smells like cabbage.
Yeah, don't hate on my boy.
I knew you were going to defend the Pitt guy. His hands did measure larger at his pro day today, so that's nice.
Oh, did they? I haven't.
I think they're like an eighth of an inch larger now.
Well, he's double jointed, as you know. He can extend that hand a little bit because of his thumb.
So he's really got like 7.5 inch hands, is what you're
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So Malik Willis, then Matt Corral, Ritter, Howell, Strong. Do any of these guys stand out to either of you as guys who might produce early in maybe the right situation, or would it have to be the perfect situation, or all of them sit and wait, hold the clipboard guys until year 2?
It's rough. I mean, JJ doesn't do like the QB stuff. I've been doing the quarterback modeling too for a while, and this is the worst class I've ever seen. Like objectively on paper. And now eventually, like you said, these guys have to go eventually, but it's rough, man. It's rough in these streets. It's easy for us on fantasy just to take the cop out and just say, hey, we've got one guy who's like an amazing athlete and could run around, and we'll just take that guy. But like in real NFL, like it's kind of a crapshoot for these guys. I mean, everyone's got real red on their ledger. If you compare this class to last year, and ironically, as great as last year's class looked on paper, I mean, all these guys collectively struggled year 1. We don't, and that's a word of caution too, just because Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson smashed, like we had Justin Herbert smash, like doesn't mean like one of these elite guys like automatically gets the hit, right? And that's what happened last year at the quarterback position. We had just this class where we were all gaga over all these guys. You got Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence has been the 1-on-1 for like 3 years running. The 5 first-round quarterbacks, they all collectively struggle. And then maybe one of these guys that ends up like playing well, like out of their shoes. But it is a really, really rough class. They all have like the stuff that's like real sticky for the NFL is like all accuracy metrics, and all these guys are so bad in all those. I mean, I have all this stuff written up on the site. We'll get like super into the weeds on it, but it's really, really, it's a really, really rough class. I think that's what we've seen play out. One, we talked about, John Lynch making the trade for Trey Lance. We talked about Dan at the combine, and then just the movement we've seen pre-draft on these quarterbacks. Nobody is wanting to go in needing their quarterback for 2022 to be a draft pick right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I could see a couple of them going in the first round, though, still.
Because
they will. Teams have to
they definitely
2 or 3 of them are going to go in the first round because teams have to try and get that guy. And that rookie quarterback contract is so powerful, to building an NFL team around. If that guy is just
you're seeing it. Look
league
at this free
average,
agency.
they don't even
Look
have to
at
be
what the
great.
Chargers.
If
Yeah.
you have
Look
like
what the
the
Chargers are doing.
17th best quarterback in the league on a rookie contract, you can build a winner.
Yeah.
Jared Goff and the Rams.
And that's what's crazy about the AFC, and just like you said, the arms race that's going on. I mean, you've got Burrow, the Bengals and Chargers right now, like see their window. And obviously the Bengals made the Super Bowl, so they know their window exists. But you see how these teams are approaching free agency last year. The Bengals historically were a team that never spent a lot in free agency. And last year they spent a bunch of money in free agency because they had Burrow on a rookie contract. They go back this year and they're spending more again, obviously on a clear necessity part of their team and the offensive line. And then the Chargers are just going like all diving in because they know teams know now this is the window.
They have to. And you're saying that with these two teams, and that I'm not saying you're ignoring, Rich, but like it ignores the fact that Mahomes has been to like 87 straight AFC championship games, and Josh Allen is a freaking unicorn who looks like the best quarterback in the league, or at least the betting favorite to be the MVP next year. So like even these great teams that are building around these young guys still have to contend with so much in the AFC. It's absolutely ridiculous. But thank you guys for being here. I really enjoyed talking about this stuff. Definitely follow Reeves and JJ on Twitter if you don't already, and check out Sharp Football Analysis, and LateRound.com for all of their work as well. Guys, thank you for joining me. JJ, Rich, thank you guys for being here, and we're going to have to do this again before the season kicks off. Otherwise, look out for another video right there.
He's a legend.